everyone. I'm very happy and excited to welcome you to this conference. The topic we are going to tackle together today is enterprise class custom plugins. Is it a difficult path to leverage a custom plugin? Do I need one? And what are the milestones for this particular project? We honestly hope this presentation will address and clarify most questions. We will look at three main sections, namely technical, maintenance, and legal aspects. To finish, I will hand over to Adrian Itulescu, the technical manager of Mind Sciences, an US company mainly focused on helping people fight addictions, such as smoking, for example, and who hired us to develop a specific video playback plugin. They later open sourced. As you can certainly hear, I'm French, and I'm an open source evangelist, entrepreneur, and pre-sales specialist for more than 20 years now. I worked with many languages, including Java, Node.js, and several front-end frameworks. But I'm mainly a tech enthusiast and a tinkerer. Just a few words about JNESIS. We are proud to be Ionic's unique gold partner for Europe. We specialize in data, mobile, and AI, and we can reasonably say we are an agile team of experts. JNESIS offers a wide range of professional services, including consultancy, development, training, and off-the-shelf R&D. We work for companies mainly in Europe, but also in the US, New Zealand, Australia, and in several other parts of the globe. Now the question is, why would I need an enterprise class plugin? First, a short reminder. As you certainly know, hybrid apps are designed to run web code, in other words, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, natively on Android and iOS. Key point, Ionic allows one code base working on two different platforms. So you can break free from native UX and navigation and access hardware and software capabilities through plugins or APIs. And last but not least, you can deploy your app on Google Play Store or Apple App Store. Having a further insight, we can see various options. A development using Cordova, the historical framework, or Capacitor, which is Ionic's modern alternative for Cordova. Both give you access to the full power of the device, like GPS, file system, Bluetooth, etc., through plugins or APIs by wrapping your web code in a native container. Now let's look at both tools. There is Apache Cordova, which I have already mentioned. Cordova is the open source core of the commercial Adobe PhoneGap project. It was released 12 years ago in 2009. It runs web apps across multiple platforms, mainly Android and iOS, but however, it is not a progressive web app. Important point, it is the abstraction layer that manages the native code. In other words, Cordova modifies it directly, so it's hard to update and add your own native code. In short, there is one API for each platform, and it allows a very large set of plugins that is beyond 5,000. Point: some are not maintained anymore or by only a few remaining contributors. Therefore, one might consider whether they are a good pick or not. Then there is Ionic Capacitor, also an open source, released in 2018, vetted by Ionic and compatible with a PWA first or a web first approach. It runs web app across multiple platforms, Android, iOS, Electron, and web. And you have access to a local CLI too. But you have one API for all platforms. And it's easy to access to native code. It's not only limited to Ionic plugins, but easy to develop your own custom plugins. It's certainly worth pointing out native code is independent from the HTML JavaScript code and exposed to the web layer through Capacitor API. so Capacitor does not modify native source code. It's easy to work in teams with both native and web developers. It also supports existing Cordova plugins through a boilerplate system, and you are free to choose between Swift, Objective-C on iOS, and Java, Kotlin on Android. Now we might really wonder what a native plugin is. It is actually a way of adding native code to a web app. A native plugin extends hybrid apps functionalities to access native SDKs and native APIs on each platform, Android and iOS. Now it's possible to do everything you can do in native. You can even incorporate native UI controls. And finally, you have the possibility to deploy it using NPM, for example, and to reuse it later in a future project. Capacitor manages plugin a different way from Cordova. In Cordova, you would actually need to copy the plugin source code directly to the app folder before building it, whereas in Capacitor, all the plugins are built as frameworks on iOS and libraries on Android, and installed using the leading dependency management tool for each platform, Cocoa Pods and Gradle Maven respectively. Also, even if Capacitor doesn't require plugins to provide JavaScript, many plugins still do. Let's now have a look at a way to build your own plugin in Capacitor. Surely we want to check out first whether the feature we are looking for is already available, and whether the license requirements are met. Now, the main point is Capacitor is especially designed for that. Why is that? Because it makes things really easy, as we explained a few slides earlier. I suggest we now move on to the next point of our presentation, that is, what do I need to develop a Capacitor plugin? In fact, both tools and skills are actually needed to do the job. To develop some native code, you basically need 2 IDEs and up to 2 operating systems. Concerning iOS, you need Xcode, and therefore you need a Mac. As regards to Android now, you have Android Studio that can be run on several platforms. And even if, to some extent, you can use another IDE, these 2 IDEs are recommended or even required, not only to develop, but also to deploy or to manage the emulators. You will also need a few basic tools, including NPM, Ionic CLI, and Capacitor CLI. For Capacitor 3, you need the latest long-term support version of Node.js and NPM version 6 or beyond. In case you wonder which skills are necessary to develop an Ionic plugin, actually up to 80% of the effort will be concentrated on native skills. In comparison, Ionic skills only require 20%. Fact, if you want all these native skills in-house, it simply means your company or organization needs more staff. In other words, one must definitely consider whether such skills are necessary within your company, knowing that one single developer experienced in mastering 3 languages may be hard to find. Just to sum up, 3 developers is quite a team to kick off a project. Now let's talk about how to create a Capacitor plugin. As part of this conference, I propose to study a very simple example: access to a phone's contact list, after having eventually requested the necessary authorizations from the user, and simply list the data. To achieve this, we will use Ionic 5 and Capacitor 3, implementing the use case both on Android and iOS. Basically, you have to start with some plugin initialization using npm init. Doing that, you will get a bunch of folders, including one for Android and another for iOS, that will host respectively the native code for each platform. Also an SRC folder with the web implementations and interfaces, and finally a folder for the builds. Once it is done, you have to create the method signatures in a TypeScript file called definitions.ts. In my example, I will simply define a getContacts method that will handle the job of getting access to the phone's contact using promises. The echo is just a sort of hello world example that is automatically generated. Now we have to implement the Android native code. To do that, what we want is define a Java class that extends com.getCapacitor.plugin. Please note the @capacitor plugin annotation that will hold all the basic information about the new plugin. The methods with @plugin method annotation are tools that will be callable from the JavaScript. Finally, you have to make sure you get the right permissions to access the phone's contact. That will be handled by the contacts perm callback method. The data will be then returned back to the client with the resolve method of plugin call. Pretty much the same pattern on the iOS side. First, you will have to define a simple Swift class that extends CAP plugin. Exported methods are easily callable directly from the JavaScript. Once your plugin is generated, you can start editing it by opening plugin.swift. And finally, as permissions are required, you have to implement the permissions pattern. It's now time to ask ourselves how to add our freshly created custom plugin to an existing Ionic project. In your existing Ionic app, you will have to add Android platform by typing npx cap add Android. For iOS, npx cap add iOS. Two ways to add plugin in your app. If you have a local plugin, run the following command, npm i path to your plugin. If your plugin is already published on npm, just update your package.json accordingly and simply launch npm i. And finally, just run your app using command line Ionic Capacitor run Android, Ionic Capacitor run iOS, or deploy it from Android Studio or Xcode. Last step of the technical process, publish your plugin to NPM. 3 basic steps. You must first set up the project by completing the package.json file. After that, let's set up your NPM account by using the npm add user command. And finally, simply run npm publish command to publish your package onto npm. Today, I would also like to share some best practices with you, based on our own experience. I will focus on 3 main areas. First, related to coding. Prefer undefined over null and over known values. Example, if an Android API returns 0.0 to denote no value, then the value should be converted to undefined for the JavaScript layer. Prefer identical units. For example, if an iOS API uses Celsius and an Android API uses Fahrenheit, then the value should be converted to one or another before it reaches the JavaScript. And always prefer ISO 8601 datetimes with time zones over date formats. Second, the tests. Our advice would be to design a minimalistic Ionic app to test and eventually publish it as a plugin usage demo. But no fuss, just focus on testing your plugin, but on a wide range of targeted devices. And to finish, and it's probably the most important point, plan some maintenance to keep your plugin up to date. Long-term support is certainly what makes a big difference for an enterprise class plugin. Indeed, If you address a niche or specific need, it's up to you to make sure it will continue to work all along the life cycle of your plugin. Of course, you can also hire a third party to do it for you, but definitely you can't ignore it. Developing in a native way cannot be a one-shot and implies time-consuming operation for maintenance. Native code has to evolve and has to remain stable to reduce user uninstalls. So why can't native code be freezed and must be maintained on a regular basis? You have to take in consideration operating systems evolve at a fast pace and can create major issues in your app. So you always have to keep an eye on this. You also have to update in response to new devices and technologies. To use latest technology to ensure app performance is definitely a good choice. And finally, you have to consider maintenance and evolutions in response to user feedbacks. So to summarize, native code requires frequent updates, up to multiple times a year. Last aspect we will tackle together today is the legal one. It is important to take into consideration that your work must comply with the licensing requirements of the technology you have chosen, in our case, Cordova or Capacitor. To give you an overview, you have on one hand Cordova with its Apache license 2.0. It's very permissive. You can copy, modify, or even do a commercial use. It's GPL v3 compatible even if you mix code. You just have to list your modifications. But you can't choose a name for your plugin that mentions it's endorsed by Apache. For example, Apache Super Plugin is not okay, but Super Plugin by Apache is okay. On the other hand, you have Capacitor that uses an MIT license. It's very permissive too, also GPL v3 compatible. You just have to add a copy of the original MIT license and the copyright notice. When you start developing an enterprise class plugin, you should consider different steps. First of all, and it's mandatory, you must include the proper license, depending on the choice you made between Cordova and Ionic. Then you have to host your project in a private repository, like NPM Enterprise or equivalent. Indeed, it's sunsetting on June 2021, and GitHub packages is the recommended alternative. Finally, you have to set up a token-based authentication to control access to your project. I will now hand over to Adrian, who will give you some feedbacks directly from the field. Over to you, Adrian.
Thank you, Laurent, and hello, everyone. I am Adrian. I lead the tech team at Mind Sciences, where we develop digital therapeutic programs to address mental health issues and addictions. We have various mobile apps through which users get access to the programs. They can watch the content and use the tools and exercises available. We've been using Ionic since version 1. We started back in 2015 with AngularJS and went through all kind of stages and upgrades. We're currently updating from Ionic 4 to version 5, and we're moving all the apps from Cordova to Capacitor. I will mention that with every upgrade, we reevaluate our options and position, and so far every time we decided Ionic and Angular are still our best choice, so that we can deploy our apps to iOS and Android and also the web from a single repository, which most other frameworks don't support easily. Throughout the years, we've been dealing with all sorts of plugins for Cordova and Capacitor. As probably a lot of you already are aware, some are great out of the box, but some are more challenging. With the great developers in our team, we managed to fork plugins, fix bugs ourselves, improve them, or even create our own simple plugins. However, we hit a roadblock when we needed to integrate a video player in one of our apps, and there was no plugin available out there. There was a native SDK available, but since our team didn't include any native developers, we decided to look for options. My wish back then was to find a company that would specialize on developing plugins for Capacitor. Unfortunately, we couldn't find any. Most of the companies being specialized on the JavaScript side and had little native experience. That's when we decided to take our relationship with JNESIS a step further. We had been working with them already for a while and discussed to outsource the development of this video plugin entirely. We provided a basic set of features and they organized their team internally to meet the deadline and fit our budget. Overall, Laurent and his team did an amazing job and this project was a success. The player is integrated in one of our apps already and we plan to add it to all our apps in the near future. The main advantage here for us was that we could focus on the app itself. We could integrate the design screens, APIs, and so on without having to hire new developers with native skills or even convert any of our own, which takes a lot of time and energy also. I truly believe that the hybrid approach to mobile app development is extremely important in today's world. Where users expect the same experience on mobile, web, and desktop. And so Ionic is one of the major players here. And the plugins world, however, can still benefit from a lot of organization. And I hope to see more companies get involved into this type of work. We're glad JNESIS is our partner, and with their skills, we can now take on new challenges. And we actually started the new project this week for a new plugin, which we're looking forward to. So thank you very much, Laurent, for the help you and your team have been providing to us. It's been a great adventure so far, and yeah, we're definitely looking forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you, Adrian, for this very interesting testimony. As a conclusion to this conference, I will try to summarize for you all the points you need to consider for a successful enterprise-class plugin project. On one hand, you have the easy stuff. As you certainly have seen in the first part of the presentation, technical implementation and a working link between native code and JavaScript are quite straightforward. But on the other hand, you will have to consider hiring or training people, for example, if it's an Ionic or a JavaScript developer, with a pretty harsh training curve for Swift or Kotlin. You will have to deal with making native code compatible. For example, some cool features are available in iOS 14, but not in the previous versions. And last but not least, you will need to consider a long-term support. Anyway, enterprise-class plugins are a great way to meet specific needs and take control of the future of the component that is important for your strategy, with the ability to evolve in the way you want to, and to integrate the features you need when you need them. We have now reached the end of our presentation. Thank you for your attention. I really hope that it has met your expectations and answered the various questions you may have had about dealing with enterprise-class plugins.